Welcome to the Smart Factory.
Good morning and welcome back to yet another day here at the Smart Factory Learn With Us event, broadcasting live from our headquarters in Roskilde in Denmark. It's a beautiful city. It's about 30 kilometers out of Copenhagen, which is our capital. Ridiculous small kingdom with almost 6 million people living here, speaking a language that nobody understands. So we have to practice and learn English and German from school. And I think that most of us understands everything at least in English, and most of us speaks it as bad as I do. So I hope that my session today will give you some information, hopefully also something to think about. That is one of the purposes of doing these events. We just give a few more moments for people to attend. So I'm just blabbering away. Basically, I just want to recap a little bit on the past 3 days. It's actually been very, very well received, this webinar here, because Industry 4.0 or the Smart Factory or digital transformation or all the things that we've been talking about this week is something that it's a necessity to know and understand. But also, as one of our frequent visitors during the past days, Jacob Heddedam-Hummel, a former Heidelberg employee, said in one of the first sessions where he joined, was that it's kind of fun because when Industry 4.0 is fully implemented and just part of our daily work life, we may not have sessions like this talking about it, because there's no reason to talk to. I mean, if we today talk about the mobile phones, we don't think of them as anything special. We like when Samsung and Apple releases new versions to the market, but when the day is over, we just use them as the technology that we are using for whatever we are using them for, right? But that's part of the transformation process. Basically, we're using technology as we get it. I think that also history learned us that some of the things that that companies develop, if it's not aligned with the needs in the market, they fail. If it's aligned with the market and the needs and how we want to use technology, it will be used. And sometimes, for example, when Apple created something that looked a little bit like not an iPad, but some kind of device, they did it maybe 10 years too early. They were not successful with it. When they did it with the new iPad, they became very successful, maybe because the screen was bigger, maybe because the processors were faster, maybe as a result of people getting used to new technology in new ways that you haven't used before, right? So today is about what is a digital mindset. And that is not as easy to tell you about as you might think, because as far as I've been able to read and view in my research for today's session, there is no one definition of what a digital mindset is. So what I've decided to do is to take a slightly different approach to it, because I want to see if I can put it in relation to something that people from our channel will be mostly interested in. So that is in relation to maybe to something in relation to a printing company. So let me share my screen here. It takes 2 seconds here. So I did create a slideshow. I'm not so good at these, but so this is I think this is a great photo because it shows two things. It shows a brain, which could relate to some kind of intellect. But what is more important here is that you see all the lines and all the dots. And the digital mindset is what I will also explain in my presentation, is also a result of connecting everything. As we spoke about yesterday, Industry 4.0, IoT is an immense part of that journey, and you essentially connect all devices in order to create network economy, network working together, network in almost every aspect. So this is a good picture in this opinion, and in my opinion. Before we talk about the digital mindset, I just want to bring a little bit history into to what I believe is also interesting for people to know. This slide here, the dots I have identified here is basically that you have a center dot 1, 2, 3. These dots represent companies. We could say that this is printing companies in a village or city in your local country. And then you can see 4, 5, 6 is a little bit apart from the 1, 2, 3, and that is companies within the same industry but in another city. When I started in the printing industry many years ago, the main competition we had, that was before the internet, but the main competition we had was within the printing companies in the city. Printing companies at that time were very important local companies, quite big for a small company. Most companies were maybe 15, 20, 30 people, and they delivered brochures, notepads, letterheads, envelopes, newspapers, phone books, all the things that were used to communicate at that time. Remember that before the internet, mass communication was mainly on paper. Radio was in some countries also very well used, but television and television advertising and anything electronic advertising simply didn't exist at that time. So the competition was fierce between the local printing companies. I even remember that in the city I used to work in, there was like 3 or 4 companies, and it was like almost that if we met somebody on the street working in the other printing company, you wouldn't say hi to them. You were like, you didn't talk to them at all. That was like how things were at that time. Then a consolidation phase started. I remember the printing company I used to work for, they started merging with another printing company in the same city. And then they started looking into merging with companies from the nearby cities. And that kind of consolidation was, because at that time, again, remember that just before the internet started, before we even started to talk about social media, the technology for having a higher volume print, offset print, and also the digital printing started this time. It was that the mantra was like bigger is better, and the way the printing companies, they were really well off companies. Many of the printing company owners at these times were really wealthy people, and they were, of course, hungry for more. So consolidation was part of it. It was often not so much because the need of doing it from the seller's perspective, but more because they were retiring and maybe they didn't have any kids that wanted to take over. So the natural step was to sell to your once fierceful competitor in your market. An example, because these kind of printing companies became bigger, the competition was not so much within cities anymore, because some of the cities only had one printing company left. So it could be like nationwide competition, and everything was based on that print was the dominant mass communication tool. So of course, all the things were important, like pricing, delivery times, quality, and these days, all the offset vendors started to produce machines that were faster and faster, and the mantra was faster, more beautiful, faster setup time. Started to introduce the different kind of, for example, varnishes on the machines, and the varnish had a few advantages. It looked great, it still does, but it also had the advantage that you could finish the products faster because it was literally dry when it came out of the machine, so you could essentially take it to the bindery. So speed and delivery time was, of course, also something that was on the radar this time. And then a globalization started. But where the mantra maybe earlier was a little bit that consolidation came because of the necessity of the companies to become bigger nationwide. The globalization was also a result that now the internet started to be a technology that could actually be used to send larger files, to communicate in different platforms, to make sure that everything was growing. So computers were faster and better. Internet was introduced, and it's also, we shouldn't forget that that file creation from InDesign, Quark Express, Photoshop, Illustrator, and these kind of tools suddenly became mainstream software solutions that made it possible for everybody to create content in a way that could be easily converted into a paper-based communication. Faster, newer technology. This is essentially Industry 3.0. So what I'm talking about here, maybe some of you who watches this may remember that this was the good old times, and maybe you remember that when we had these kind of competition technology, it was quite easy to, I wouldn't say competition is never easy, but it was quite easy from the perspective that you knew that if you looked at your competitors and you could see what kind of hardware they had, you would be able to identify where their painstaking and therefore to sell your products and services based on that. I remember that, for example, in the city I lived in at that time, I knew exactly what equipment my competitors had. So every time I was visiting a customer, we had a 5-color machine, my competitors had a 4-color machine. So if I could offer a 5-color job where it looked really stunningly great, I knew that the other competitors, if they wanted to match this offer, they had to run the print through the machines 2 times. So obviously that gave me a competitive edge. I also knew, since we had dispersion varnish on our machines and they didn't, I also knew that when I could show a customer the output of dispersion varnish on a piece of paper, my competitors were not able to do the same. So, these kind of things were kind of part of how you competed and how you had to understand the situation of the time. And if you look at this pyramid here, you can see that it's very kind of centralized, and you have a structure where you have like the bigger companies, the workers, the stations, the control, the field device, and then it ends up with products. And these products, they have no connection whatsoever with each other. So Industry 3.0 is how we live now, but we are in a transformation process, and that's why we have these events and these discussions, and so many also from TEDx. You see a lot of very good presentations of the change that we are currently in. And the interesting thing is that where most people may not think of being part of Industry 3.0, and maybe most people today just think of everything as the most natural part of the journey. Everybody adapted to the new standards in a relatively short time. My mom is 75 and she uses a mobile phone, and she uses electronic banking, and she uses a lot of the things that we today just take for granted. But there's also like a generational issue in these kind of things. And I think that Industry 3.0 has definitely moved everything to where we are today, and we are in the middle of, or maybe even in the very far in the Industry 4.0, as we also been discussing the past days. So what I think, and I want to stress that it's a belief rather than a fact, because as I said in the beginning, it's very difficult to find like a one definition for what a digital mindset is. So I came up with the conclusion that maybe the digital mindset is a consequence of Industry 4.0 rather than a service or a product or a mantra that you can define and live after. So let me give you an example on this one. If you look at some of the elements that are defining the Industry 4.0, as we've been talking about the past days, we have automation, AI, big data, augmented reality, democratization. And if you think of it for a second, can you imagine that we are working in a time where we are not influenced by the technology that we live in? Imagine that we got a mobile phone, but when the first smartphone came along, and we used it, but it didn't have any consequences to our lives. I don't know about you guys, but for example, in my family, I think actually it has led to a lot of information that my kids they have easily access to, but I also find it very annoying that we have become kind of victims to technology. The four of us, we always have our smartphone. We always look at it when it gives signals. It's like it's really interfering our lives. So if we just with a smartphone and a tablet and with the internet and social media and TikToks and whatever all these names are, have influenced our lives as it is now, how can we not think that the Industry 4.0, with all these things that I have mentioned in the cloud here, should influence how we live our lives and how we have to adapt to the future? So that's why I think that the digital mindset is maybe way more a consequence rather than something that we define and decide to go into. For example, one of the things that we have to think about is I heard a great presentation, a TED talk from a German professor from a university, and as he said, when we look at, for example, education is part of a journey where we are put into boxes. And the kind of boxes we are looking into is because we live in a time where the value we create is based on the service we deliver. And when putting things into boxes, we know that this is an engineer, this is a programmer, this is a kitchen worker, this is whatever kind of job you have, you put into these kind of boxes. But one of the things that you might think about in the future is that why are we educating people to unemployment? Because now everybody has high education, at least in many countries in the world, but the fact is that it increases the cost of labor, and we are also evaluated and put in boxes and positions based on our education and our work. But what happens if a robot takes over our job? Does it eliminate the need for education? Does it eliminate the value that we create? These kind of questions are maybe a little bit, because I know that the politicians and also a lot of us will say that, yeah, but it moves us to a higher level of education and a higher level of value. But can we expect an entire society to be engineers or software developers, or how can we create these kinds of things? Or will we see a new upper class and a lower class? And how will it be if you look at from continent to continent? Will continents where you have a lot of poor people be able to jump on the bandwagon here and get to these kind of things? So again, Industry 4.0, honestly, I think that Industry 4.0 is extremely interesting to see and follow. But it's also kind of weird, because let me just turn back the history just one more second. Because, for example, people think that, okay, it's so wonderful to have Amazon with smart deliveries, and you can click on a button and then you get your washing powder and all these things that are possible. But I can't help thinking of when I was a kid. I'm born in '68, so I think maybe that was in the mid '70s. I remember this. My mom. We lived in a small village, and it was very typical for that time that when she went shopping with the local grocery, she went to the shop and picked the things she wanted, and then she left the things with the register and she paid it, or maybe she even had an account there, and then the delivery boy was delivering the goods in the afternoon. So I mean, everything that we talk about with the Amazon, where you order online and to get it delivered to your home. I mean, of course, the technology behind it and the availability of products and services way exceeding anything that my mom did in the '70s. But from a factual perspective, you are basically still buying products and just getting them delivered instead of picking them up themselves. So it's the connectivity and all the things that we are doing now needs to be used for something that is better, smarter, creates more value in our lives and how we operate with everything. And with the Industry 4.0, one thing is that we can, as I spoke about yesterday, the IP6V protocol enable all things to be on the internet. And of course, it's smart that you can have a refrigerator and you can see with a camera system, you can see into the refrigerator without opening it. Of course, it's smart that you from your smartphone can see the expiration dates of the things you have purchased and so on. But does it really change our lives? I think that where some of the technologies and some part of the digital mindset is also changing the way that we see things, is that we should use the technology to the greater good. How can we use it to become more environmentally friendly? How can we create products with less waste? How can we produce on demand so we don't produce exceed stock? And how can we do all these things in order to make sure that it's not just a replacement of old services and technologies, but actually bringing humanity steps forward? Bold words, I know that. So connecting is not only machines, but also the mindsets. And that is where the digital mindset maybe is the most interesting thing, because this will change how we also collaborate. As I've written here, digital mindset will define how industries and people will be enabled by thinking technology into processes. That means that if we just take all the technology and just put it into like smart homes, smart factories, smart everything, I think that we could become victims of technology. And one of the speakers I heard in my preparation for this said, you have, at least as a business, you have to decide, do you want to be the driver or the one that is getting driven? These things are extremely important part of this journey. And that leads me to also one thing that I found very interesting in one of the conversations I heard. The real value in the future may come from things that can't be made by a machine. Think about it. If we take the consequences of robots, AI, smart factory, lights out production, all the things that we've been talking about during the past days, why should we then have any value in the labor and the services we provide? The transaction, the reason why you go to work on a factory today is because you are compensated for something that adds value to the owner of the printing company. But if you can do that by robots and with smart factories, then there is no need for work. So is Industry 4.0 just pushing more people into the unemployment queue, or is it also an opportunity to really consider how the society should be put? I know that some people during the COVID-19 have agreed to split the work with the other workers in order not to get unemployed. This might be one option. That is for sure that the hours we work to get money enough to pay our bills is definitely changing, also because of the digital mindset and also because of the Industry 4.0. But what happens if we don't get any income? Because most people don't have the intellect, the creativity to actually have anything that they exchange services for. This is also something that is quite interesting. Then there's an old saying that says that everything that can be digital will be digital. I like that sentence, and I am certain that it is true. But that also implicates that with robots taking over things that can be taken over, that the values in where we can make money in the future is being creative, smart, disruptive. And I cannot spell, I can see, or this is my auto spell. It should have said hi. So creativity, smart and disruptive people will be in high demand, and that's good. But what about the rest of us? Because where will we be in these kind of things? Will we just be plugged into the matrix where it's our brain power that is used for the computers and the commodities, or how will that be in the future? So what is a digital mindset, right? This is the headline of what we started to talk about here, and I have not really answered the question. Then I read an article in Forbes, and they described it to be: leaders find what works and replicate it, or leaders see you adopting a technology as a strategic, not just operational move. Leaders don't take a wait and see attitude. Leaders are firm believers in upskilling employees on a continuous basis. Leaders don't believe in boundaries when it comes to both technology and human potential. See, in my opinion, this describes things pretty much aligned with what I have been talking about today. But what does it say? It doesn't say so much. So I found another one, a website called Learnovators, and they say that it's also digital mindset is also about an agile approach, comfort with ambiguity, explores mind, collaborative approach, embracing diversity. See, that is also part of what I think and believe, but that is totally different from what Forbes just said. So I try to describe it in my own words, and I say that I believe that the digital mindset can be your ability to collaborate, can be the to identify advantages of technology, identify the creative and disruptive, hint unique, and that can be both people and businesses, and how you see everything around how you operate in what you do, and create value based on the mindset of one. One thing that I also believe is an immense, I'm not saying that it's a value in itself, but I'm saying that I believe it's something that we can't avoid to think of. Being in the mindset of one is, first of all, it's like for printing companies, I think that mass customization is not just a mantra now, it's something that people need to really relate to, make sure that they can produce off. But that also means that we have to be able to think of the customers as individuals rather than corporates. That's, for many printing companies, a total different mindset, that instead of seeing that large companies have one procurement department or one procurement agreement with one printing company, you might have as many as you have people that buy there. But that means that your business have to not just be automated in pre-present production, but also have to find out how you can communicate with all the stakeholders and all the individuals that will be the contact point to your printing company. During the week, we have seen everything from how software from in example, HP can be the bridge between vendors and brand owners, to yesterday how technology with AMP from Baldwin can actually automate a lot of different processes. We've seen also web to print by INKISH, how that can create a purchasing experience for the buyers. But as Jacob and I spoke about yesterday, we still maybe miss a little bit the backwards thought of how the data can also be used to what is presented to people, because the creativity also comes from being exposed to new potentials and new ideas. And that is maybe one of the challenges that we as an industry have, to figure out how we can continue to inspire everybody who could be or are customers within the printing industry. So I think this is great, but let's say so. But remember, I believe, and truly believe, and I think that you should think about it and maybe adapt it to be yours as well, that the digital mindset is rather a consequence rather than something that you just decide to do. Because, as I said, when we are now entering into Industry 4.0, and everybody will be doing that regardless of whether we want it or we don't want it. But the fact is that when we buy a new printing machine, or a new binding machine, or a new enhancement machine, or whatever we buy, it will be Industry 4.0 or smart factory enabled. So the consequence of getting these machines is that if you don't do anything with the technology available, then you end up maybe being the company that can't survive. So that is important to understand what you have between your hands. And then it's time for Q&As. I hope you could use this for anything. This is I'm not in my comfort zone, because I think that INKISH and what we do is very well aligned with how the new communication and all these things are. But I think it's not something that we have defined. It's something that comes with the ability to use the technology given. I remember I spoke to a guy from a researcher in the future development university a couple of years ago, and he said INKISH is a great example of this disruptive new ways of doing things. Because if there was no internet, if there was no YouTube, If there was no social media, if there was no LinkedIn, there would be no INKISH. So again, you can see that is a consequence of the technology. It was not something that we defined. It is something that is a consequence of a lot of different things that is giving you the opportunities to hopefully make money with it. And at least I hope that this will be something that gives you something to think about. So thank you, and please join me. You can click on the request to speak, or you can ask questions in the chat box if you like to. So thank you for now. Wow, that was I hope that was good. I liked it because I did it myself. Wow, that is so that's so bad to say, but I did anyway. So any questions from anybody or anything you would like to discuss? As I have already said many times, I'm not trying to be Mr. Wise Guy and having the kind of answers to all the questions. I'm just trying to bring my perspectives into debate so we can talk about what's right and what's wrong and what could be interesting to think about in the future. So anybody? Well, doesn't seem so. So then I will just say thank you very much for your time here, and